Hi everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Today is the first in a series of 5 webinars we'll be hosting on Mondays throughout January and February. My name is Eli Winderbaum. I'm the Operations and Community Manager here at BetterCloud. I'm also an expert in FlashPanel and also in charge of training here. So today's webinar is titled Using FlashPanel for Google Drive Auditing and File Sharing Policy Enforcement. Basically, that's a way of saying how you can get the most out of FlashPanel to help manage your Google Drive on your domain. If you have any questions throughout today's presentation, please feel free to use the GoToWebinar Questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. To follow along with a lot of the things we'll cover today, you can visit bettercloud.com/keys. That'll take you to our ever-evolving white paper for the best practices of using Google Apps, a lot of which is aided by the help of FlashPanel. So today's agenda, we're going to explore FlashPanel's Drive functionality, everything you can do within the application. Number 2, we'll assess the state of your domain, kind of the current domain health check. Next, we'll define a plan of action so you can immediately begin bringing some docs into compliance. Next, we'll create some sharing policies. And lastly, we'll teach you how to teach your users how to use FlashPanel and what they can and can't share. So many of you on this webinar have used FlashPanel for the directory management, but a whole other piece to this FlashPanel puzzle is the drive management. So here, what we've done is given you all the tools you need to take control of your Google Apps and Google Drive domain. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to run a drive sync. You can click here to see the last time your data has been up to date. If you click on it, you'll be given the option to sync your drive data. There's no limit on how often you can sync your drive, although there is a 4-hour limit in between. In the settings, you can also set when they'll be scheduled to sync, and currently you can do so 3 times per week. So here in FlashPanel, you can learn a lot more about your Google Apps and Drive domain than you would in the control panel. Right off the bat, you can see the total number of documents that you have. This is as of the last time your domain has been synced, as well as all the types of docs, depending on if they're Google Docs or uploaded files. You can even see what types of documents they are. Here is Drive Sharing Alert, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, but basically there's a way to create sharing policies in which if there are any violations, you can read about them and view them here, as well as take action. At the very bottom, you can see a quick number of the total number of docs that are shared publicly with a link, externally, domain, or domain with a link. If you click here, you'll get something similar that'll show you just over time the way things have been looking. So we like to see that public is going down usually, and these little spikes here might be a good indication of when something's happening in the company that you should be concerned about or at least find out about. So back at the top, we have a search bar where you can search for a number of different attributes, one being who a document is shared with. You can also view a document owned by a user, organizational unit, a title, and other different ones here. If you really want to get into the filtering system, click on Drive on the left navigation. You can actually filter by a number of attributes. You can filter by the owner, organizational unit, and again down here, exposure, which is one of the ones that I like to look at. So if we were to click on exposure, we can see all public docs. I always look at this first thing in the morning to see if there's any documents that have been shared publicly that perhaps shouldn't have been shared publicly. So we can see the title of the document, who the owner is, the size if it's not a Google Doc, number of people it's shared with, when it was last updated, and also the status. Status being the shared settings, and also if there's been any flags. And we'll get into flags in a moment as well. So this is a great way to see any type of doc on your domain. So we can click on a particular document, and we can see many things about it. One being the current sharing settings. We can actually do a real-time API call and see all the live sharing settings, who it's shared with, and we could even add other users if we'd like to share it with them. We can make this person able to edit or view, and even add a message if we like. Again, we can also change the current settings. So if this is public with the link and we'd like to bring it back to private, or at least on the domain level, we can do so from this screen as well. If we're not sure, we can always click in and look at the actual document by clicking here. This looks like it's a Word document, although we can always see it right here. And from here, we can go back to the search results. If we'd like to look at owned by a particular user, type in the user here. We'll be able to pull up all the documents owned by this particular one. If we think that this is an at-risk employee who may not understand what sharing publicly means, we can always click this checkbox here. We can select all, and we can edit the permissions. If we like, we can always change the owner. We can add a collaborator if this person hires an assistant, or perhaps someone will be replacing him. You can remove him as a collaborator, or you can change the sharing settings right from here for multiple documents. So here, we'll at least bring these back to compliance on the domain level, and I'll get a notification by email when this is complete. So now that we've explored what is possible inside the Drive functionality here, we can now go a little bit further and start taking action like we just did. So another thing I like to do is do the shared with. Oftentimes people end up sharing documents with their personal Gmail, either for legitimate reasons or not. Either way, maybe your company policy is not to share publicly. So again, we can select all that are shared with a @gmail.com account, edit the permissions, change sharing settings, and make this private. This is something that you should be talking to your users about and comes into play during your education process. Another thing you might like to do is if you have a competitor, you can just type in that competitor's name, let's say competitor.com. It'll show you if anyone on your domain has shared with that account. Something that also happens is you might be dealing with a consultant, and maybe the consultant has ceased the relationship over 6 months ago. There's really no reason for that firm to be accessing any of your documents. So you might want to search for them and replace and revoke all access. And we can search just by title. So this is obviously something we don't want to get into the hands of the wrong people, so it's good to know that we can find this and edit the permissions whenever we like. The next piece of FlashPanel's Drive functionality is sharing policies. And if you set up these sharing policies correctly, it'll save you a lot of time and effort as time goes on. It'll also allow you to keep a better handle on your domain and keep it in better shape. So we can see here that we have a couple different sharing policies. There's one for everyone on the domain. There's one for each organizational unit that we have. We also have particular users. Down here you can see in the key the red being not allowed and green being allowed. So we can see everyone on the domain can share on the domain level with a link on the domain, but cannot share externally, public with a link, or public. The exceptions are the people in this organizational unit who can do so differently, and then particular users have more or less permission here. So if we were to click into an example of the interns, we can click on the actual sharing policy that we've created, and we can always toggle on and off the allowed and not allowed. If you do allowed here, you can always add a blacklist. This might be a competitor so you can share with anyone except these competitors here. You can even put Gmail. You can also do the opposite. You can make it not allowed but create a whitelist. So this might be your partner, someone that you want to do business with, and you don't want anything to be flagged. And when something gets flagged, a couple of things happens. One, you can turn on auto compliance, and that means the next time that a document is shared in a way that it shouldn't be, and a sync runs on FlashPanel, the administrator, you, will be alerted of those changes. So let's say someone who's in the intern organizational unit tries to share publicly. They will be able to share the document publicly. There's no way to prevent them, but upon the next sync of your domain, you will be alerted, and you can even choose to have the person who violated alerted. So down the line, you will want to set up auto compliance, which will automatically bring it back without you having to do anything. But before you do that, you really need to train your users properly. And the way to do that is with the notifications. So first you need to enable the end user sharing alerts, and this allows your end users to be able to understand what it is they're sharing not properly or out of compliance here. So when something does get flagged, we can do a couple of things. We can email the doc owner about these sharing violations. You can preview what that looks like here. You can even choose to email others. So we'll update this policy, and we'll see what it looks like for the end users. So you're logged in as the administrator, although every single user on your domain has this end user access. This gives them the basics. They can view the employees on the domain, the groups, the company, or shared contacts, but that will be time for another webinar. The part that we're talking about today is these sharing alerts. So we can see that this user has 19 sharing alerts. And this user can view all 19 that they violated, and they can do two things with them. They can click into them directly to view them if they're not familiar with what they are, and they can also determine if they like to either correct them, meaning they'll be brought back to compliance, which we can do here. And the other thing they can do is request an exception. If they think that the document is not an issue, you can choose to request an exception, and this will come to the administrator, so he or she can say, yes, I agree with this should be marked as an exception, and maybe we can change your sharing policy accordingly. So this really empowers your end users to take control of what they can and can't share. Back in the admin mode, we're still looking at the sharing policies. So the everyone is for everyone on the domain, and then as it gets higher, the organizational unit will apply, and then the most granular here is users. So maybe some users like Larry Page can share however he likes, pretty much, and then some users have no ability to share externally. So we could then go to sharing policy performance, and we can see that the everyone is performing the worst. That makes sense as there's a couple dozen users there. So we can click on interns, for example, or we can click onto the unread or unresolved. So we'll click on the two unresolved, and we can see that there's two topics here. This looks like it's probably okay, so we can mark as an exception. And we can choose to do this indefinitely or for another amount of time. And we can also choose to autocorrect the sharing settings. So basically we're overriding the request for exception here. So it's pretty cool that you as the administrator have the ability to control all of the documents here and make sure that everything is brought into compliance. A couple of use cases and examples here are perhaps a sales organizational unit. You wouldn't want them to share publicly, but otherwise it's okay. An executive board might go either way. Either they're very tech savvy and they understand and they can share publicly, or perhaps they don't really understand Google Docs that well. Maybe you'd like to limit what they can share to be only within the company. So really, the next step here to make it so you don't have to do too much as time goes on is training your users. So you really should have an open conversation, or they should at least understand what they can and what they can't share. So once you've done this, you can really turn on this auto compliance, meaning that if you don't do that, users will continue to share and share and share without knowing what they did wrong. So it's really important that they understand what this auto compliance is. Another thing to mention here is that you may not be the right person for the job, and you may want to give this role and delegate it to someone whose job it really is, perhaps a compliance department. You can actually go into settings and create an access control just for someone to manage Drive. This means you're giving delegated admin access just to the Drive functionality to, let's say, someone in the compliance department or HR department, someone who really knows what they're doing. Oftentimes this is the CEO as well, especially if the CEO is not a domain administrator or super admin on Google Apps. If you have any questions about Google Drive, you can always visit our support website. It's support.bettercloud.com, and here you can view many different topics within Google Apps. So you can click here on Drive, and you can see all the documentation that we've added here. So if you do have any questions, you can try and help yourself here, and if not, you can always direct questions to here. You can always submit a request. This will come to myself and my team, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. Moving forward, we do have a lot of different plans for Google Drive, so we will be adding as much functionality as possible. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next week on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be talking about how to automate domain management using policies in FlashPanel. So this is a great webinar that we're planning a week from today. If you like this webinar and others that have been recorded, will be up on flashpanel.com/webinars. You'll be able to see some really great training videos as well. So that's another great resource you can find. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me, Eli, E-L-I, at bettercloud.com or visiting support.bettercloud.com. Thanks for joining us today and hope to see you next week.